If I could just have your attention. I'm not talking into this because we need a big speaker in here, but this is being recorded, and so I've been asked to keep this in front of my face so for posterity purposes, this will never be forgotten. My name is Tom Lee. My wife Colleen and I are trustees of the Autry Museum, and we go back to the Southwest Museum, which was the other museum in LA that the Autry merged with about 20 years ago. So we've been involved in the Autry for a long time. We love it, and we participate in all sorts of things. But anyway, this is really a very special event because we're not on our home turf, but we've got a great turnout tonight. I'd like to start out with a few thank yous. First of all, Ann Phillips, where there's Ann. Thank you so much for hosting us and your beautiful home and this fantastic art collection. And of course, I have to brag a little bit about the fact that you've purchased some of this at the Masters, which is our very important event at the Autry every year. And secondly, I would like to thank Ed. They're hiding behind me here. I figured he couldn't be very far away, right? Anyway, thank you, Ed, Mell, for being the program tonight that we're all looking forward to. And then finally, of course, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. As you know, or maybe you don't know, but our mission at the Autry is to tell the stories of the West. And what better place, what could be more Western than being in Arizona? So we're excited about becoming part of the community here, and we look at these salons as being a great way of kind of extending the Autry into this whole vast area of the West that we like to tell stories about. And so the first salon we did was just a little over a month ago. We had one actually just a few miles from Ann's home here with Matt Smith. And it was a great event, just like this. And so we're delighted to be here in Ann's beautiful home and doing another one. And we have a third one planned. The details of it are not worked out yet, but I have to use my cheat sheet here for this one. It will be with Logan Maxwell Hajeji. And his studio is in Ojai, and we're hoping that the event will be at his studio in Ojai, but we don't know that yet. Yeah. See, I think he would like it to be there. So anyway, the details of that will be coming out soon. And all right, I think he wants me to quit talking so we can get on to the main event. So I'll do that. What I do want to, I need to look at my notes here. I want to let you all know that the next Masters is already scheduled. Opening night will be on Saturday, February 11th, and it will extend through March 26th. And I'm sure that obviously things are already in the works for that. I know it'll be a wonderful event, and I hope you can all participate in that. And I would just like to thank all of you for supporting the artist community as you do, and for supporting the Autry. We greatly appreciate that. With that, I would like to turn it over to Amy Scott, who is our Executive Vice President of Research and Interpretation. And she is going to be our moderator, or what's the right title for your role in this tonight? Will that do?
Interviewer?
Okay. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Amy. Amy, it's all yours. And
Thank
Ed,
you so much. Thank you.
I think you're supposed to hang on.
I've got a little, yeah.
You guys are wired.
We're good.
Do I sit here?
Right here. This is perfect.
Okay.
So I want to also thank Anne Phillips for letting us use this amazing home of hers. It is the perfect setting. And you also have, importantly, I think, original examples of Ed's work, at least on these two pillars on either side, along with a number of major artists who show within the Masters, including John Moyers and Terry Kelly, who are also here with us, Mark Maggiore, Tony Abeta, Jason Rich, are just a few of the names, Eric Bowman, that I've noticed on the walls tonight. So you're really in the midst of a fantastic collection. Also, Jen Samsel from our development department, who organized all of this, and to all of the Autry trustees, especially Tom, who you just met, and his wife, Colleen Lee, who are here with us tonight. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Tonight, we're here, of course, to talk with one of the most recognizable painters of the Southwestern landscape. This is an artist who has been a fixture of Western art museums, including the Phoenix, the Eiteljorg, and now, of course, the Autry Museum. And today we're going to get a look at Ed Mell's work in the context of art history, of Arizona, of Western art, and of American modernism writ large. At first, some of these things, especially modernism, may seem somewhat oppositional. Western art, including landscape painting, tends to be thought of or considered as romantic, sublime, grandiose statements about the West, its resources and vast spaces, in epic terms. Modernism, by contrast, we tend to think of as spare, clean, abstract. Yet, in the artist sitting before you, we will see an effortless blending of the two, revealing that the historical and the modern can indeed get along, and quite beautifully at that. So, let us begin. Now, this might be a slightly different set of images that you expected us to begin with. But Ed was born and raised right here in Phoenix, and after some community college, he enrolled in the Art Center of Design in Los Angeles, where he focused on graphic art. And soon thereafter, he accepted a position at a large illustration firm in New York City, a large advertising agency. Yeah. In New York City, where he worked as a junior art director before forming an illustration studio with a friend in his living room. Among his early claim to fame is this rather somewhat, racy image of a naughty Minnie Mouse who graced the 1970 cover of National Lampoons. And apparently, she was designed to get attention. Do you want to share a little bit of that story?
The story is they said, we want you to do Minnie Mouse in that, doing what she's doing there. And we did we said they're going to get sued by Disney, so we changed her up enough to maybe not get them sued, and they said, no, we want dead-on 1940s Minnie Mouse. So we did it, and they got sued. And it wasn't until about 3 years later I was reading an interview with one of the main guys of National Lampoon, and it was all calculated to get sued because the magazine was struggling, and they needed the attention. And they only got sued $10,000. So, and we got paid $150 for all that. So, anyway, do you want me to keep going with that story, or are you? What's that?
Undressed. That's the headline.
Did you meet Raquel Welch or Charles Manson in the process?
I didn't. We were, but we did other work we did 2 covers for them. I had a friend, Skip Andrews, and I had a studio called Sagebrush Studios, a little reflection of our Western heritage. He was also from Phoenix, and we were kind of on the forefront of the 60s resurgence of airbrush in illustration. There was only one other major illustrator in New York using the airbrush at that time. And as you know, it became super popular. Guys got really good, and I bailed. But go ahead.
I was just going to say there is a second image also here, which might be a little unexpected. And those of you who know Ed actually probably do know that he's also a collector of classic cars. And he owns at least 7, I believe.
Correct.
Including this one on the screen. which is a red Corvette
Oh, yes.
from the early 80s?
60.
60s. So I know about classic cars. And as a kid, you apparently aspired to be a car designer. And there is a certain streamlined, aerodynamic quality to your art. And I'm wondering if there's any relationship between the allure of sort of the geometry of the Southwest and car design.
Well, I think it all plays a part. You know, when I was a kid, I even collected stamps, and now I look back at them, and the appeal of the graphics kind of really, I found I just loved stamps, and I like to draw, and then of course automobiles were a major thing, and then when I got into illustration, Art Deco we were really into that, and so influences come from everywhere, and they all play a little bit of a part, I think, in your mental approach to whatever you're doing graphically.
So Ed is also not an artist, as you can tell, I think, even from these early and sort of idiosyncratic images, who draws inspiration from one place, nor does he necessarily stick to one style, nor does his career evolve in a linear way from representation to abstraction, as we tend to think the traditional sort of art history or art historical line goes. So we're going to look at a series of influences on Ed's work and relationships that he has to artists throughout history, beginning with, of course, a friend to many in this room, Maynard Dixon. So in 1970, a friend that's teaching, you're in New York, and a friend that's teaching on the Hopi Reservation invites you out there to help with a program for kids.
Yeah, they had a summer arts program on Third Mesa.
And this allows you to get sort of reacquainted with the desert landscape of your youth.
Yeah, you know, sometimes, as they say, you got to leave somewhere to appreciate it more when you come back. And so I went directly to a village of 200 people on the Third Mesa. Haute Villa is the name of it. And was immersed into that world for 2.5 months directly from New York City. And I was just in the beauty, the sunsets, the vistas, all of it. And we did some traveling in that area when we weren't teaching, and even took some kids on some field trips. And it just got in my blood, and I really decided I had to come back to Arizona. You know, if you're from the West, it's really hard to get it out of your system, you know.
So when you're, if you know the art history of Arizona, you know that Maynard Dixon, this was one of his loves too, along with parts of Nevada and New Mexico. And Dixon is, of course, the source, I think, for a lot of artists, a lot of younger contemporary artists, Logan Maxwell Agege, Eric Bowman, among them. But Ed has been working or looking at and thinking about sort of Dixon as a source for much longer than that. And in fact, I think it's not a small stretch to say one of the things that, you sort of, that is recognizable about your work are the clouds in the skies. And we're going to look at some clouds specifically in a little bit. But what is it about Dixon and the lines of his work and or the skies that appeals to you in particular?
You know, a little bit of my history with Dixon is I started painting, and I was I was unfamiliar with him, to be honest with you. And I was buying bound volumes of Arizona Highways just to kind of submerge myself in Arizona history, stuff that I'd missed when I was growing up here. And I found him, and I went, my God, I'm kind of close to that guy. So I started painting more realistic than him, and then I revisited my modernist early approach to my painting, and to face it dead on, I had a show in Santa Fe at the Owens, at the Dewey Galleries downstairs, Owens Dewey upstairs, where it was my work and Dixon's, because I wanted to make that statement that the influence was there. And in 1981, I had a cover on Southwest Art Magazine, and Don Haggerty called me up, and he is the foremost authority on Dixon and was very much involved with writing about him, and eventually did a book on him. And I met his wife, Edith Hamlin, through Don, and I met John Dixon, and he brought him out here, and she'd read that I was flying in helicopters, and we arranged with Jerry Foster, who was Channel 12 then. We took John Dixon, brought Edith out, and we took her on a helicopter trip she'd never done before, and she was in her 90s. And we flew up to Sedona and around Sedona, and came up the Verde River and landed, and she talked about painting with Maynard. So it was a really important moment, for me to have that connection. And of course, Don Haggerty was there too. Mm-hmm. And then Don wrote my book. So there is definitely a connection there in a lot of different ways.
Another artist. It's okay. Everyone's a critic.
Little comic relief.
So we see the presence of Maynard Dixon, and I think pretty clearly in Ed's work and a lot of contemporary artists of the West today. Another artist that we see less of, somewhat surprisingly, because she's really one of the better known faces of late modernism in the Southwest in particular, is of course Georgia O'Keeffe. And I thought this O'Keeffe painting of Ranchos de Taos Church, which is from 1929, speaks to really the way that she saw fluid architectural forms, in particular the flowing lines of this church, which she painted many, many times. In that they're almost organic. Adobe architecture lends itself to that, and that it seems to sort of flow and kind of grow out of the landscape itself, being mud and brick. It really is almost sort of an extension of the earth. And your work, in particular, seems to sort of flip this basic idea, whereas O'Keeffe's architectural paintings have a landscape quality to them. Your landscapes have an architectural quality to them. And so my question for you is, when you're thinking about the landscape, whether O'Keeffe is on your mind or not, do you see an architecture to it? Do you think about the built environment relative to the natural?
I do. I don't think about O'Keeffe in that manner. Maybe more so when I do flowers, but to me, I was always dealing with the structure of the land a lot, and the power of it, and I think geometry helps accentuate that. So that was kind of unrelated to her, but the Taos founders, they were all doing incredible things, from Andrew Dosberg and Victor Higgins, and Raymond Johnson is one of my heroes for sure, although he wasn't part of that group. But the modernism that came out of Mexico is definitely, they're my heroes. Some of my favorite people, and works come out of that. So.
Could Ed speak up a little bit louder?
Could you crank me up, buddy?
Okay, let us know if that doesn't improve.
Oh, he's got to do it on me. Oh, okay, I'll try to speak up louder too. Yeah.
I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, okay.
So Speaking of O'Keeffe, who's of course best known really for her flower forms, which are often sort of cited as this feminist take on nature, your flower paintings take a similar up close, sort of deconstructing the flower or the plant from the inside out. But your take has a specifically sort of a hard-edged quality to it, that it seems to me, that turns the flower into pure form. So you start painting flowers in the 1980s.
Correct.
Which is around the time that O'Keeffe is sort of at the height of her powers anyway. I think she dies in the late 1980s, but she's a presence in Santa Fe, and flower paintings are in museums everywhere. So what is there, whether there's a relationship to O'Keeffe or not, what inspires this close-up take on nature? Because these are, I think, are some of your most striking works. And in fact, there's one right here on the wall to our left.
Well, I would say I was painting landscapes and I was getting a little bored with them. And I kind of wanted to do something with a different palette, a different perspective, something close up. And I was aware of her work, you know. And I think hers are very feminine. Mine are a little more masculine approach to the same subject matter. But not all of them, you know. Some of them I did were pretty realistic too, just accentuating the color and the light that hits a flower. To me, it was just, you know, I think painting subject matter has a lot to do with, can you learn something and keep experimenting with it? And to me, nature is probably, and especially the Southwest landscape and flowers are, to me, I can keep reinventing myself in them and not reproduce myself too much.
And there's a particular sort of Southwest, almost Arizonan quality to this flower, because it looks like a cactus flower. It's got a hard-edged, you know, spikiness to it.
Right.
Unlike the O'Keeffe flower, you don't necessarily want to stumble on this one while you're out on a walk. So it's got that kind of hard-edged.
You don't want to smell it too close.
Yeah, and there's a toughness to that flower, I think, that comes across in your work that sort of speaks to the desert environment.
There's
broadly.
also a fragile beauty to it, I think, you know. It's kind of a yin and yang, I guess.
It's also a nice sort of combination, I think, of the representational, you know, the up-close sort of really intense investigation of the color and the subtle variations that are contained within the bloom, along with the realism of the spiky, you know, kind of harsh ecosystem that is also the Arizona desert.
And simplified, definitely, and you know, the real things are much more complex. So I kind of simplify the forms.
So speaking of simplified forms, the next image that I brought in is a painting of dance next to a 1912 painting by Marcel Duchamp that was called Nude Descending a Staircase, which inspired no small amount of controversy and ridicule when it was first exhibited actually in New York in 1913. And the reason I brought in the Duchamp is sort of this early example of Cubism is when Picasso is making sort of his breakthrough into the full-on Cubist portraits, is because it exemplifies the way that Cubists look at movement, not as something to be captured and frozen in time, but something that is visible in being in constant motion. So the limbs are showied in their various movements and locations. And this, I think, speaks also to your painting of the Hopi dancers. You can see it at work in some of your paintings of cowboys and of bronc riders. And can you talk a little bit about Cubism in particular and sort of the ways in which your figurative paintings especially, and I think your sculptures do this to some extent too.
Well, Cubists were kind of trying to show an object from different angles within one painting, was kind of their basic thinking. And I'm just fracturing it up to show energy and movement. So I think that's the main difference. And I think Anne's cowboy piece up here is a good example of kind of breaking it up. And they all start out as little studies, and some of them work and some of them don't, you know, and some of them, the idea's there and you keep working on it till you get it right. But yeah, this piece was you know, I don't do a lot of Native American work, how I feel a little uncomfortable about it. But teaching up there was a few images I saw that I wanted to play with. In fact, I did a bronze of Hopi long-haired Kachinas in clay, and I took it to Vernon Masayesfa, who he was head of the school when I was there, and he was then chairman of the tribe. And I said, Vernon, do you have a problem with this? And he said, no, can I have one? So it was anyway, you know, you got to make sure you're politically correct in this world. So anyway, that's that story.
A lot of the Taos artists, of course, that you also admire, including Dosberg, were drawn to New Mexico precisely because of its native dances, and painted a lot of them in that sense of movement. Really inspired a lot of the art that seems to inspire you. But yet your take on movement is really different. It's much more, you know, sort of a hard-edged, you know, sort of Cubist abstraction than much of what you look at in terms of early modernism, at least in the Southwest.
Right. Yeah, and there were some guys doing that early on, breaking things up. Emil Bistrom was one, and there were a few others too that did it. And you know, I always feel that in art we're all kind of a continuum of the past. You know, you learn from that, and you dissolve it, and you mix it up, and try to make something new out of it. You know.
Indeed, we have. The next pairing, these are both Ed's paintings, but I wanted to talk about the ways in which, now that we've gone through some of the art historical styles that Ed has been inspired by and made his own, is the relationship between realism and abstraction. And I don't know that I know of an artist whose work these two things cohabitate within quite as organically as they do in your work. So my question is do you toggle back and forth between the two? I know there is something of an arc in which you began more abstract, turned representational, and then went abstract again. But how do these things coexist within your head, coexist within, you know, your hand when you're working on a painting? And is that a difficult thing or not?
Actually,
so much?
it's kind of freeing, really, because there's a certain fundamental feeling about painting something that's based on realism, and you're kind of using a different part of your brain, and the abstraction sometimes starts just as a few lines on a board, and they suggest something, and so you're kind of trying to break your own rules to see if you can find something new. So you know, you can exhaust that part of your brain and that thinking. So painting realism is a relief from that. But then you get then you recharge your batteries, and you know. And I feel fortunate that I can play in two genres like that and find an audience for both of them. And sometimes I'll do a realist piece that will suggest something I want to do more modern, because not all of my modern is abstracted. It's just, you know, it's stylized, changed. So anyway, does that answer your question?
I think so. I'm always really sort of amazed by artists who toggle back and forth between media. So painters who become sculptors, and as you are one of these artists, and then go back and forth and seem to have sort of equal facility in both mediums. And you do that not only with painting and sculpture, but with artistic styles. You usually see an artist go from the realistic to the abstract, or perhaps in the other direction, but rarely do they go back and forth with quite such frequency and inconsistency. So there's a certain kind of virtuosity to that. And when you explain it as something that the one style sort of frees you and liberates you from the other, and gives you the space to then go back, is a really interesting way to explain it. So let's apply that to this next slide, which is a series of, I think, 7 cloud paintings in a variety of moods.
Oh. Okay, now I see what we're talking about here.
Clouds. Some of those probably look familiar. Clouds in and of themselves are a really big subject for you.
To me, there's such a variety of mood and color. I'm always trying to find something fresh and new within it. Not, you got to do a lot of paintings that overlap each other a lot in terms of color and form, but nature provides amazing variety of things and all those color and form to play with. So, and I do shoot reference for them, and I use it on my realist work. I might have 2 or 3 pieces that inspire me, and then I take it on my own from there. And the abstracted stuff is, a lot of it's kind of based on memory from things I've looked at. So
these are theatrical, I think, to the point of being almost sort of operatic. And I know that you've actually done some stage design. But the idea of sort of finding theater in the Western atmosphere is also something that I think of when I look at your work. So when you see a thunderstorm brewing, do you grab your camera and run outside? Or, how do you... These
Sure.
guys are amazing. Like how... some of them obviously have realistic components in our experience, especially those of you who know this site and its environment. But they're also just extraordinary and over the top.
Yeah, I take pictures. I don't know what else to say about it. But,
Okay.
But I've always kind of thought of the canvas as sort of a theatrical statement that we all make as painters. There's certain elements that we all want to put into those, and I've always felt accentuating nature a little bit, because the real thing is, for me, it's hard to not. When you're really in nature, the power of it is, a great sunset, beautiful mountains, a certain light and stuff is, you almost have to push it a little to get that kind of feeling.
To the extent I think that there's almost sort of a supernatural kind of quality in some of these works. It's like they are animated sort of by a force that is not even necessarily of that world, which, reminds me also of the some of the 19th century, sort of sublime landscapes by Bierstadt and, Thomas Moran, if you think of his Grand Canyon paintings, that echo in these. So you've translated some of
those guys pushed it.
Yeah. And you've translated that into sort of a modernist form that is clearly born of the West today. So do you think about it in those terms? Do you see the cloud and the clouds and the atmosphere and the thunderstorms as they roll in? Are those are animated sort of forces of their own, I guess? And do you think of them in those ways?
Yeah, I do. I believe there's an energy and there's an emotion to those clouds, It's hard to paint a haboob, though. I know that. They just it looks like a brown wall.
It's like, oh my God, that captures the force.
Yeah, I mean, storms are amazingly powerful things, you know. As we know, they can flood your home and blow your whole house down. So there's a lot there a lot of movement within that to work with.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways that's what these paintings really, sort of are about the power of, the literal forces of nature
Right.
than the specific
so.
cloud formation or the
Right.
the lightning bolt or the mountain underneath. The next slide I have is this is a painting that I don't know how many of you know, but it's in the Autry collection. It's a large painting by James Doolin from the 1980s, around the time that Ed is, starting to get his feet sort of swallowed in the Western landscape. And the reason that I brought this in is to show how sort of resonant I think your work is with contemporary landscape painting in the West today. And that this idea of the sublime and the power of nature is not necessarily in opposition with a contemporary viewpoint upon the West. Mm-hmm. That's mainly what that was for.
Okay. You said it all.
And then I thought we would wrap up with this painting that we purchased out of the Masters exhibition. Yes. It's the first major work by Ed in the Autry's collection, and it was our purchase award. Yeah. I thought I put the good one in there. Is that the one I gave you? I thought it was. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's the angle here.
Yeah, it might not be the absolute. The colors are crisp and flatter, I think, than
it's much darker.
That.
That's the reflecting.
Yeah,
one.
I think that might actually still be the first image.
Yeah, that's okay.
But the painting
it's much more dramatic.
Yes, more dramatic, exactly. More contrast.
It's very dark. The blacks are very black, and it's got a certain energy to it. It was. They invited me to be in, and I said I only have time to do one, and I did this one, and I gave them a little study for their miniature show, and I was fortunate enough to get the purchase award. So I felt very honored. First year out, I got that. And it was anyway. Thank you.
But I thought this would actually be a good note to end on, not only because it's the museum collection, but that you might sort of walk us through. Your process and using this particular painting as an example.
I should have given you photographs of the studies. I did 2 studies for this. One was about this big, and I had a very general idea. Again, I put down some marks, sort of suggested some things, and developed it on that level. And then I did like roughly an 1824 study where I refined those thinkings and the color and the shape and added a few things to it. And then I did it larger, and that was the bigger piece. So Autry, I think, comes from more of a traditional background. So I was very honored that they purchased it. It made me feel good that could be part of it, Old Gene would.
I think Gene would have appreciated that for sure. But do you begin with a specific land formation in mind, or do you start out with lines?
Well, it works different ways. Each time's kind of different. This time, I had a vague idea of kind of what I wanted clouds to play a game with a canyon wall, and that's kind of about all I had going. I wish we had. I gave her a better shot. She just didn't put it in there. Sorry.
That's okay. I did put it in there. I just don't think it quite made it into the final version. So I apologize for that. But you'll just have to come to see it at the museum, where it is currently hanging on the wall, right outside of the Montgomery Gallery. So we were super excited to see that in the show. It was that one choice, at least, quite easy that year.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So that is most of what we have for you this afternoon. I wanted to make sure we had a few minutes for questions. Eddie.
Hi, Ed.
Do you listen to music when you paint? And if so, what is it?
I do. And
I'm kind of feeling that.
I have an iPod with about 5,000 songs on it, and I put it on random, from jazz to rock and roll to, there's a little classical. We got some Hispanic music that my wife gave me to put on there, and a lot of stuff. So
Any go-tos that you start with, maybe?
go-tos?
Go-to bands or go-to artists, or
Oh,
that you kind of start with, you just let it fly?
Put me on the spot here. You know, I don't know. You know, I was a kid of the '60s, so a lot of that stuff still works for me really good. But I like modern jazz. I like a lot of the modern hipper music. You know, I still like things that Neil Young's doing and Bob Dylan, and so I'm kind of all over the gamut. You know, you know, with that many songs, there's a song will come on and I go, I don't think I ever heard that song. Yeah.
As a stamp collector, can you speak a little bit to the Centennial stamp for Arizona?
Oh, yeah.
Some background on that?
Well, that was really an honor. It wasn't, I thought those things were a competition or something. But there was a stamp designer that lived in Scottsdale, and he called me up and said, I'm doing the Centennial stamp for Arizona, and I want to use you. And he had mocked up 3 of them with my paintings, and I said, well, I really need to do a painting for this. So the Grand Canyon had been done on stamps that the 50 years of, what is that, a half a centennial, or whatever you call them, was Saguaros. So I decided, to me, Cathedral Rock in Sedona was unique. It also fits the proportion of a stamp. So that's what I did, and it got accepted. And so it's interesting. They said they gave me $5,000 for it, but they said, you know, the stamp is now considered currency, and it's ours. I mean the painting. So, and Jim Ballinger wanted to borrow it for the museum, and he couldn't even get him to loan it to him, which would have been kind of cool, really, you know, for that year, 2012. But it was, to me, those kind of things are things you have to, when you're asked to do. On my list is I designed the stage sets for Riders of the Purple Sage and Opera done in Phoenix. I did Carter Caverns. I did a big painting for their visitor center. And I did the stamp, and Jackknife in Scottsdale are kind of my public things that I've enjoyed doing. So anyway, hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that was helpful.
Anyone else?
Anybody else?
As a father of a 22-year-old who just got her bachelor in fine arts, and my creativity level is stick figures, do you have advice I can give her that she might actually listen to?
Well, is she a fine art major?
Yeah.
Send her over to the studio. You know, I do that for a lot of young people. I think it gives them a sense of what's going on. And, you know, all artists, you tell them one thing and they do the opposite. But I still remember times getting advice and going, oh, geez. But, you know, if she'd be interested, I'm sure through some connection here, you can get my number and give me a call, or we can talk afterwards. And if you'd like to bring her over or something at some point, if she's interested. She may not be. What does that old guy know?
A thing or two.
But, you know, I think it's good to have people that have been there and kind of get a sense of it all.
Awesome.
Anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you
It's been a
so
pleasure.
much. Thank you.